number 7. And I need to remind you, I'm just going to rehearse where we're at. We've been looking at the seal judgments, and Jesus was opening the scroll and unrolling these seals, and every seal that was unraveled or broken revealed something to us. And so the first scroll, or first seal, was that peace or false peace, and that peace was not going to last. And then it was followed by war, and that's the red horse. And then it was followed by the third seal, which would be famine. And then the fourth seal was death. And we looked at several things about that. There's pestilence and all sorts of things going on. And then the fifth seal was martyrdom. That's what that was, all right? And then the sixth seal, there was all sorts of things. That's really when the faucet begins to really open. We began to see the great earthquake where mountains were moved out of its place, and islands were not in the same place. So everything, the whole earth was shaking. And because of that, or at least one of the results of that, would be ash and smoke and dust going into the atmosphere. And so the sun is darkened, the moon is darkened. You have all of that going on. Then at the same time, you have meteor showers and stars coming down from heaven, and men out of fear trying to hide in caves and rocks, trying to get away from it. And they do recognize where it's coming from. And we're going to get into that in just a minute. They do recognize eventually where all these things are coming from. This is the judgment of God, and God is using these things to judge the earth. And so that's where we're at. All right. So in the middle of that, there's kind of like a little, like you would say, a parentheses. We're not looking at the seventh seal tonight. We're kind of looking at another happening that's going on during or just after the sixth seal is opened. So let's go to chapter 7, verse number 1. Let go back to verse 17 of chapter 6. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? It asks a question there. Who's able to withstand this horrific events that are going on? Who's able to endure that? And it actually answers the question when we get to chapter 7. So let's look at chapter 7 here. And after these things, I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels, to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, Hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000. And of all the tribes of the children of Israel, of the tribe of Judah were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Reuben were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Gad were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Asher were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Nephthalim were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Manasseh were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Simeon were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Levi were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Issachar were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Zebulun were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Joseph were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Benjamin were sealed 12,000. So we'll stop right there, and we'll deal with this little chunk, the verses 1 through 8. And so again, all this devastation that we've been talking about in the sixth seal, and men begging for death and just death all around, in the middle of that, the question is asked, who shall be able to stand? And in the middle of all that devastation and death, there is some survivors, all right? So in the middle of that, so there's some survivors of that, and we're looking at least some of those survivors, all right? And so again, I told you, I think before, and we'll look a little deeper in this as we go, but I think it was a fourth of the population up to this point, I think, is going to die. So that's about, if the population is the same as it is today, it's about 2 billion people that are going to be wiped out at this point. And so now you have some people that are left, or survivors from the devastation that is taking place at this moment. Let's see. And so not only So, and let me just say, within the survivors of this particular time frame, it is not only going to be 144,000. If the population is 8 or 9 billion and 2 billion have been lost, there's going to be a lot of survivors still. You with me? There's still a lot of survivors. Now, the 144,000 is a portion of those survivors. There will be Gentiles that will survive this to some degree, but again, we'll get a little more specific when we get to this 144,000. A lot of these survivors are still, as we look through this, and I showed you this in one of the last lessons, how that they knew where this judgment was coming from. They knew what it was for, but yet they repented not, and they still blasphemed the name of God in their sin and refused to accept Christ. And so, again, at the end of all that, do you remember the parable that Jesus gave? I believe it was in Matthew 25 about the sheep and the goats. Remember that? And how at the end he was going to separate the sheep from the goats. And this is the time that this is going to happen a little bit later than what we're talking about here. But so there will be survivors. And some of these survivors, these 144,000, these are not the martyrs. We've already talked about some martyrs, and there will be other martyrs around, but it is not these people. These people are sealed, and they are sealed with protection. And you have to remember something else that's going on. It's not just these natural disasters that's happening. What we're going to be getting into here is the Antichrist is going to be ramping up the persecution against believers. And there's going to be martyrs and death as a result of just persecution. So if you think it's difficult to be a Christian now, how much harder is it during that time when they're literally just like in the New Testament church when the church was just formed and the Apostle Paul was hunting them down, killing them, and putting them in prison? It's going to be basically the same thing. And so on a grand scale, this is not just a regional. This will be on a global scale. They'll be hunted down. But then you have some here again, because even when you're reading through here, it'll talk about and nations. When it's talking about nations, and it's not talking about the Jewish nation or Israel, it's talking about Gentile nations. But one other thing that I want to bring to your attention is that, and you can go and look even back in Daniel when it's talking about those different Gentile empires with the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, the statue that he had a dream of, that, we are living right now in the time of the Gentiles. That's what we're living in. And when Israel rejected, now remember, Israel was God's chosen people, all right? They're still God's chosen people, all right? Israel was God's chosen people, and it was through the Israelites that he wanted to make himself known to them, but at the same time, he wanted to make himself known through them to the rest of the world. And of course, they failed at that. All right, that was a failure on their part. Messiah came, and what did they do with the Messiah? They rejected him. And so then you have, again, the time of the Gentiles. It was a big overlap there, but we're nearing the end of that, all right, as we're talking here in this particular passage. We're nearing the end of the time of the Gentiles. God's attention returns back to the Jewish nation and returns back to, remember, it is also called the time of Jacob's trouble. If you go and look in the Old Testament, it's called the time of Jacob's trouble. He's bringing tribulation, again, towards his people and towards all unbelievers, but his attention specifically returns back to Israel. And you see it here with this sealing of the 144,000. Where are these 144,000? Where are they from? It tells us exactly where they're from, correct? And they are all Israelites, and he begins to return his attention to there. And we'll get to that in a little bit, a little deeper with that here in just a moment. But let's look, and I want you to understand too that in the middle, yes, this is a time of wrath. This is a time of Jacob's trouble. This is a time of great persecution. This is a time of death and destruction. It's a time of that. But in the middle of all of that, there will be people who come to know Christ as their Savior. In the middle of all that. As a matter of fact, these 144,000 is a picture of that. It's not just a picture. There is an exact number, and there's no reason not to take this literally. There's actually going to be 144,000 Jewish men that will, again, these will be believers. I'll show you that in just a minute. but these are believers, and there's some characteristics that they have, and I'll show you that in just a moment. But I do want to, I want to bring in a prophecy into this. Go to Zechariah. Zechariah chapter 12. Verse number 10. Now remember, in the middle of all of this, in the middle of all this persecution, destruction, and death, that God still saves some. Does that make sense? So there's still redemption that is going on during this time, and this 144,000 is proof of that. There's also going to be some Gentiles who get saved during that as well. But remember what we looked at before. Who are the ones who are going to be saved? I believe it's the ones who have not heard a clear presentation of the gospel, the ones who have not heard the truth and had an opportunity to accept or reject truth. I think because of those verses in 1 Thessalonians where it talks about the Holy Spirit being removed and that God giving them strong delusion. So God's going to give them strong delusion, those that have heard the truth and they choose not to receive the truth. And then also the Antichrist is going to be delivering great deception, and so they will be deceived into believing that lie. So if they have lived during this time that we lived during the church age, and they have heard the gospel, they have heard the truth, and they have rejected that truth and walked away from truth, I don't believe they'll have an opportunity during the tribulation, because they'll be given strong delusion and they'll be given deception. All right, so these people that will be saved during the tribulation period will be people that are hearing the gospel, trusting Christ. Now remember, all right, so let's go back to Zechariah here, chapter 10, verse number 13. Chapter 12, verse number 10 through 13. And I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplication. Now I want you to notice this phrase here, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced. Who is that talking about? Now look, this prophecy was given before Jesus was ever crucified. But it says they will look on him before him whom they pierced, and they shall mourn for him. Now hold on, did Israel mourn before? No, they didn't mourn before, did they? And they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. In that day, I want you to remember that phrase, in that day there shall be great mourning in Jerusalem, as the mourning of Hadad Rimmon in the valley of Megiddo. Now, remember that? Where's that? Megiddo? I've seen that valley. I've been to that city, and so it's talking about that. That's actually where the Armageddon will take place, right? At that last battle there. All right, verse number 12. And the land shall mourn, every family apart, and the family of the house of David apart, and their wives apart, and their family of the house of Nathan apart, and their wives apart, the family of the house of Levi apart, and their wives apart, and the family of Shimei apart, and their wives apart, and all the families that remain, for every family apart, and their wives apart. But I want you to notice that, look, there's great mourning, but even in the middle of that, it says that there's a spirit of grace and supplication. They shall look on him whom they pierce. Now, just with that in your mind, go back to Revelation chapter 1. Verse number 7. Behold, he cometh with the clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Even so, amen. This is the beginning. This is the opening pages of Revelation. And so as we get into this, the Jews are going to recognize who Jesus is. All right, so especially these 144,000, they're going to recognize who Jesus is, and they're going to acknowledge who Jesus is, and they're actually going to be witnesses during this time, during the time of tribulation, during this persecution, and during this natural disasters. They're going to be witnesses there. So these 144,000 that we're talking about in Revelation 7, they're the survivors after the sixth seal is poured out, and they're still surviving. And they're set aside, if you would. And so they have believed. Now, I don't believe that I don't believe that they're just like become believers all at once. You know, like there's a revival and 144,000 people get saved. I don't believe it's going to happen that way. I think it will be scattered throughout the first 3.5 years. I mean, can you imagine what the rapture, what ripples, what ripple effect the rapture is going to have when the church is raptured out of here, and the effects is going to be felt worldwide when that happens. The Bible talks about one would be taken and one left. One's in the field, one's working, and one's left. One's in the bed and is gone, and one's left. And so you have all these things going on, and some of their loved ones are gone. These are believers. I believe that from the time the tribulation begins, they will hear some truth, all right, and they will begin to understand, at least some, not all, but some will begin to understand and be saved. And so we're up to the midpoint of the tribulation now. And so when we get to that point, there has been, at this point, 144,000 Jews that have become believers. All right. I believe there's going to be Gentiles also, but again, he's directing his attention to this 144,000. And so these are saved. These are the ones who believed in Christ. And they have been spared up to now, and now they're singled out, or they're separated apart, their service. And so they're separated for two reasons. One is they're separated for protection, and they're separated for service. So God has a special purpose for these people that He is setting aside. So let's go through these passages here, all right? And then we'll get to these 144,000. So chapter 7, verse number 1. After these things I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth. Now some people would take this and say, it's flat earth right there. Flat, there's 4 corners, it's square. It's not, whatever. But this is not what that's referring to, okay? This is referring to, if you look at a compass, how many points are on the compass? Major points. There's 4. There's north, south, east, west, right? And so you have angels who are standing in these strategic places, and it says on the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth. In other words, the wind wants to blow. In other words, they're holding it back. Now, as the world revolves and we rotate, and we're in orbit around the sun, and it's rotating, and all of that, and then how often do you go outside and you can see clouds going by, and you can see that? Well, all of that is going to come to a standstill. All right, so these angels are coming there, and they're holding the wind back. In other words, can you imagine a deathly still, no breeze whatsoever? Now remember, the sun is not shining, the moon is not shining, asteroids are hitting the earth, meteors are hitting the earth, comets are hitting the earth, stars are hitting the earth. All those things are coming down. There's ash, there's dust. Everything's shaking, and now there's no wind whatsoever. Well, I won't even go into that wind power thing they're pushing right now. But anyway, but there's one day, there's coming a time when the wind is going to stop. All right, it will be unleashed in the future verses here. It will be unleashed, and when it's unleashed, there will be fury. When it is unleashed. But for now, there's angels that are holding these things back. And so there is restraint. All right, there is restraint. And you see that in verse number 1. And I want you to notice one thing, and it says, a couple things here. For the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. That's interesting, isn't it? Why does he mention those 3 things? And I want you to go to chapter 8. And we'll just kind of look at some observations here. Chapter 8, verse number 5. We're getting into the 7th seal and the trumpet judgments. This is kind of where we're getting at in chapter 8 here. But it says, what did I say? Verse number 5. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. And the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And the third part of the trees burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. And the second angel sounded, and it was, as it were, a great mountain burning with fire cast into the sea. And the third part became blood, and the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. What was the other thing there? Well, go back to verse number 1. The sea, the earth, the sea, and the trees. And so all of them are listed right here. So again, there is being restraint held back from destroying that, but it is coming in chapter 8. The trees and the earth and the and the sea. So all that is going to be affected when we get on into chapter 8 and those trumpet judgments. But for now, there is restraint that's being shown. Now, there's no wind blowing. They're holding back the wind, and nobody knows how long that's going to last. It gives an implication, but here it says, there's a stillness, no clouds. And again, that will be let go in chapter 8. But look again in verse number 2, and it says, "And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, and cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, Hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads." So I don't know how long it's going to take for them to seal these servants, but as long as this sealing is going on, the wind is being restrained. So that is the restraint that we have, and so the wind is being restrained. And also this 5th angel comes in talking to the other 4 angels and tells them to hold back before. I mean, these angels have the power to destroy. I mean, really, that's what they have the power to do. And at this moment that they're being told to be restrained. And that 5th angel says, here, there's something that has to be done before you can unleash your fury. And that is that these 144,000 have to be sealed. And so again, there's a reprieve that is going on. Everything's being held back, and you can't hurt them until this sealing. You can't unleash that until this sealing takes place. And he rises from the east. I don't know if that's like a sunrise. I don't know what that means, and I don't think anybody knows. That's kind of symbolic, I guess. But everybody's going to look to the east when that angel comes. And a seal. Let me talk about that for a moment. We even talked about this in the seal judgments, when we had that scroll. And in order to open that seal, you had to be authorized to open that seal. Does that make sense? You had to either be the owner, or you had to have an affidavit from the owner as being having the authority to open that seal. It would be like also, do you know how kings, they would send messages sometimes through messenger, and they would have a message, and they would roll it up, and they would seal it, and it would be like a signet ring. You know what I'm talking about? Like a signet ring, and it would put the king's seal on it, and then that would be sent to whomever that letter was written. And what would happen if somebody opened that seal before it was time to open that seal? That was bad news. I mean, they could be executed for it. And so this seal here, again, is God's seal. I mean, we're told who it comes from. Look again, and I saw another angel. Verse 3, saying, Hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. And this seal, now just in ancient times, just so you know, a lot of times they would use wax on the sealing of a signet ring. And then there are other times where they would use clay. Like they would put clay. Do you remember when Jesus, when he was put in the tomb and they rolled the stone? And we're not certain of this, and I'm speculating a little bit here, but it is possible that when the Romans sealed that, it wasn't necessarily just a wax seal. It could have been a clay seal, like they take mud, and they put an impression in it to let them know what authority did this, or who has authority here. So nobody else opens it that is not authorized to open it. So we have this here. So these people are being sealed, and they're being sealed with having the seal of the living God, and cried with a loud voice, saying to the 4 angels to whom it is given to hurt the earth and the sea. Now remember, these angels, they're supposed to be hurting the earth and the sea and the trees, and they're being restrained. And now the sealing is coming into this. Verse number 4, and I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 in all the tribes of the children of Israel. Now, there's so many things that, again, the Antichrist has his mark, God has his mark. We'll look at that a little bit. I don't know that we've already looked at that yet. I think it's coming still. But God does his mark, and so what is the mark of the beast? You've heard that. I mean, everybody, I remember when debit cards first came out. Do you remember that? How many remember all the way back that far? All right, I remember when debit cards come out, and you know what in churches, man, there was like an undertone. Oh man, that's the mark of the beast, man. You better not mess with that stuff, you know. And now they had chip cards. Oh my goodness, man. I mean, but you can also see how everything is progressing, even to the point where somebody getting a chip or somebody getting a mark is not as far fetched as it once was. You with me? And we may think, well, how in the world can the everybody that's living on the earth, billions of people, going to have a mark? Do you think it's possible? I mean, years ago, we would speculate how that would be possible. And now we can see the reality of how that's possible. But so the Antichrist has his seal, and that seal is in the forehead or in the hand, and we will get to that. But God has his seal too, and they're sealed in the forehead. They're sealed in the forehead, these men here. Let's see here. I think it's in chapter... Oh, and let me just say, just one thing, as God is kind of isolating these people or branding these people or separating these people for his service and for protection, because it'll come a time that there were times that they're not allowed to be touched. You know, even the power of Antichrist, they're not allowed to touch them. And many believe that these 12,000 will actually live through the tribulation period and enter into the millennial kingdom to help preserve seed, preserve mankind, and begin to populate and propagate in the millennial kingdom. All right. Again, this is just a few years from this point that we're reading here. But that 1,000-year reign, so they'll enter into that, and there will be Gentiles as well that enter into that survive that. But this is part of that as well. What was the thing? There was two things popped in my head, and one of them left, and I gave you one. So as people were separated and called out, now I want you to bring your attention, I want you to remember some things in the Old Testament where this type of thing still happened. Do you remember when... Well, for instance, when judgment was falling on Sodom and Gomorrah, remember that? And there was special protection and special things, special angels that were sent. What were they sent for? Who did they actually drag out of that city? I don't know if that's a great example, but it was Lot and his wife and his family. Remember that? And they were separated. In other words, you remember Abraham praying, God, if there's 50 righteous people, would you spare that city? Remember that. And then, okay, there was not 50. Well, if there's 40, would you spare it? And he kept going down and kept going down. And he got all the way down to Lot. And so Lot was spared from that judgment. But then you also have another example of that. You remember in Egypt when there was a mark that had to be put over the doorpost. Remember? There was a mark. And the death angel was coming through. Judgment was coming through. But the ones that had that mark... Guess what? They were spared, right? Judgment. Well, I mean, the death angel did not visit them. They were passed over, if you would. All right. And then another example of that. Do you remember Rahab, the harlot? You remember there was a sign or there was a symbol that when they came in to destroy Jericho, that there was one thing that they had to look for, and that person was going to be spared. What was that one thing? That scarlet cord hung out the window, right? I mean, that was what spared it. So when we're looking at these, this is not unusual. You understand? There's been examples of this, and but they have received that mark, and they are isolated or separated, and God has special purpose for them. And they're also called bondservants, I do believe. Let me go down here. It doesn't say it here, but I'm going to go over. Go to chapter 14. I believe this is where I wanted to get to, and I'm going to give you a little more description about these 144,000. And I looked, verse number 1, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on Mount Zion. And with him 144,000 having the Father's name written on their foreheads. So what does this seal look like? You remember it says in the seal of their God. Remember that? So what does it say? I mean, it tells you right there what it says. It, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters, the voice of great thunder, and I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung, as it were, a new song before the throne and before the four beasts and the elders. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. All right, you remember I told you they were believers, right? They had gotten saved during the tribulation. That's where I get that. It says, verse number 3, that they were redeemed from the earth. What does redeemed mean? It means to be bought. It means to be purchased. Who does that? The Lord Jesus Christ has done that. So he has purchased them from the earth, just like he purchased you and I. He has purchased them from the earth. Verse number 4. These are they which were not defiled with women. So hold on now. So there is purity here. All right, they're undefiled. They haven't. They're virgins, if you would. They have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. I mean, they're completely sold out. They're obedient. Whatever he wants, that's what they do. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. So again, there's honesty, there's integrity. Look in verse number 5. And in their mouth was found no guile. Wow, that's a powerful statement right there. In their mouth was found no guile. In other words, they were honest, they had integrity, and you could believe what they say. And anyway, in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. I mean, these guys, these are the cream of the crop. You with me? I mean, these are the ones who are giving Jesus everything they've got, every area of life. They hold nothing back from him, and they're serving him wholeheartedly, 100%. Whatever he wants, that's what they do. Again, the world around them is blaspheming and cursing the name of God. But here you have the 144,000, they're standing firm in their beliefs. They've been sealed with the name of their God. They have sealed so that they cannot be touched with hurt. Do you remember, by the way, in that example that I gave you in Israel, do you remember that some of those plagues, you remember some of them, it was interesting that some of those would be affecting everybody except Israel. Remember, go back and study that back in Exodus. That when a lot of those plagues would come, man, it would be wreaking havoc all over Egypt, except right there in Gothen. I believe it was Gothen, right where, or Goshen, right where the Israelites lived, and they were exempt. And so this is a picture of that. There's all this death and destruction, everything going on, and they're exempt because why? Because look, they are set apart for God's service. They're doing exactly what Christ wants them to do. And I happen to believe that these men are actually evangelists, if you would, or witnesses. And because there are going to be people saved during the tribulation period. And I believe these are the ones that are proclaiming truth. These are the ones that are proclaiming righteousness. And their testimony is believable and credible because this is the way they're living. I mean, their life matches their message. And they're willing to put their lives on the line, you know, in spite of the persecution, in spite of the destruction that's going on. So as everybody else is blaspheming and cursing God, they're standing strong, and they're instrumental in others knowing the truth and believing the truth. I wrote a verse down here, Matthew 24:15. We've went back to these verses several times throughout this study, as the Lord was giving us some insight all the way back from his ministry as to what was going to be going on during that time. When you therefore see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet, we're getting right there. We're right there at this time. Stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. Let them which on the housetop not come down to take anything out of the house. Neither let him which is in the field turn back to take his clothes. And woe to them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray thee that your flight be not in winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall great tribulation, such was not since the beginning of the world that time, nor ever shall be. And except those days shall be shortened, there shall be no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here's Christ, or there, believe it not. I don't know why I wrote those verses down, but it is right around that time that we're talking about. That's fixing to transpire here. So they're spared to accomplish a certain purpose during that particular time. I believe they're warning of judgment, and they're calling for repentance, and they're preaching the truth. They're completely committed, completely sold out, and completely following the Lord with everything that they have. And so that's what's going on. That's who these people are. Now, when you look at the identity, actual identity of who these people are, there are some people that still live today that think these are Jehovah's Witnesses. And there's a distorted view that they have that only 144,000 people are actually going to go to heaven, or are actually going to rule with the Lord Jesus Christ. That is not, I don't know how they even get that, but nevertheless, that's what some people say. These are Mormons. Some people say these are Seventh-day Adventists. Some people claim, that's who we are. We're the chosen. We're the special, But no, these are all Jews, okay? These are all Jews, every single one of them, these 144,000. And these will come through this judgment and enter into, they will go through some persecution. They will live through that natural disasters. They'll live through all of that. But they will make it or survive into the millennial reign. Now remember, when the Lord returns and he actually sets his feet down on the Mount of Olives and he actually comes to set up his throne, that's the beginning of the millennial reign, correct? And that is when all enemies up to that point. Now there's going to be a bunch of them that's going to be killed. There's going to be believers and unbelievers alike, not these 144,000 that are going to perish during the tribulation period. Hence, this is why we see some people, I believe it was in chapter 5. You remember the people under the altar that have been martyred, that have been killed during the tribulation period. So there are believers that are going to be living at this time. They're going to be killed, a lot of them. Some of them will make it through. Some of them will survive, both Jew and Gentile. But specifically, these 144,000 that the Lord is pointing out, these are not Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses or Seventh-day Adventists, but they're ones who God has ordained to again set his seal upon them and usher them through into the millennial kingdom. The listing of these tribes, just some interesting facts here, okay? When you go and read the Old Testament, these tribes are mentioned many times, and it will give a list of these tribes many times. And as you read those lists, sometimes they're in different orders. Sometimes they use different names. Sometimes it's given by birth order. Sometimes it's given by the way Jacob blessed his children. Sometimes it's listed by the way the encampment was around the tabernacle in the wilderness. Sometimes it was the way the census was done. Sometimes it was the way the inheritance was given out. And as you're reading through there's variations of these names. Sometimes when you're translating from Hebrew into Greek, and you'll have some variations of that name. Some of these, it should have even sounded weird a little bit to you. Asher, in the Old Testament, it's Asher, and this one I think is Asher. So you'll see a little bit of variation. It's talking about the same person. It's just the way it's translated. And so this one here, the first one here is Judah. Verse 5, of the tribe of Judah were sealed 12,000. Now, Judah is not the firstborn. Reuben is the firstborn. And there's some speculation as to why he's not the first one. One speculation is that he went in and defiled his father's bed, and therefore he's knocked down in rank, if you would. He lost his birthright, I guess you could say, because of that. Levi is never given territory, but you see him here. Dan, in this particular passage, is left out. That's interesting as well. He's added in later on in another one in Revelation. Later on, the tribe is added back in. But Dan some people speculate why he was left out here, because of gross idolatry. He also failed to conquer the territory that was given him when they crossed over Jordan. They failed to conquer that territory, and then they also were fully turned to idols. Again, Dan is mentioned in the millennial, but he's not mentioned here. Then you also see, Joseph had two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. I believe Manasseh is mentioned here, but then it mentions Joseph instead of Ephraim. And one of the reasons behind that some people speculate is that Ephraim was addicted to idols as well. He had given himself, or that tribe had given themselves to idols also. Now, one interesting thing that I want to throw out here as well, that in AD 70, if you go and study history, AD 70 is when Israel was annihilated, basically. Israel was conquered. Jerusalem was destroyed. The temple was destroyed in AD 70. Now, in the temple is where, even in some of the verses that we've read, the temple is where records were kept. But remember Sunday when we were talking about Mary and Joseph, and they brought Jesus on the 8th day to the temple. Remember that? And that was part of the law. And what they would do, you know how now when you're at the hospital, they do footprints and they prick you with blood and, they do all these things and they give a birth certificate, right? Okay, this is a real human being that has been born, and they're entered into the genealogies. You remember in Matthew where you're going through all the genealogies of Jesus, and so begot him, and, and you go all the way back. Well, all these records were kept at the temple. You with me? They were kept at the temple. And so again, this is why Jesus went to the temple. This is why babies would be brought to the temple to be circumcised. Again, it was to give record that this child was born and this child existed. And so there was these long genealogies that were kept up with. But when AD 70 came along and the temple was destroyed, all of those records were destroyed. And so the only thing that they had at that point was oral tradition. And that was a big thing as well in Israel history, was oral tradition. You see some of that even in the gospel records where some of the Pharisees and things like that would try to bring up some oral tradition. And I believe that phrase might be even used, oral traditions of our fathers or something. It's something along those lines. But all those records were destroyed in AD 70. So realistically speaking, the people today, the vast majority of Jewish people today don't actually know which tribe they came from. All right, so it's up in the air. We don't know. Does God know? Yes, he does. Now, so when we get to this 144,000 and there's 12,000 from each tribe, God knows exactly what he's doing, even though we may have lost records and we may not know, and people themselves that exist may not know exactly what tribe they come from because those records were destroyed. But nevertheless, God does know, and he will again make good on that. So as we're looking at this, again, this is the time when we're seeing the attention given back to Israel. Remember, the church is now gone, right? The church has been raptured out, right? And so now his attention turns back to the Jews. It's not that he has forgotten Gentiles or whatever. Has he forgotten Jews today? No, it's not today that he's forgotten Jews. It's just that his focus, who is he making himself known through today? Is the church, correct? All right, and now he was doing that in the Old Testament with the Israelites. All right, now he's doing it through the church. Now we have not replaced Israel, but he's just refocused, if you would, okay? And now we're getting into, again, the tribulation period, and his focus is now returning back primarily to the Jews. All right, so Israel, the first time he came, rejected him, but this time they see him, they embrace him, they believe in him, and they once again begin to know him and make him known. And at this particular time, the time of the Gentiles that was ushered in back with Persia and Greece and all them, all that time is over, and so that time is now drawing to a close, and the time that attention given back to Israel is going to take front seat. All right. You remember, again, the covenant that God made with Abraham. Remember that? I'm going to make of you a great nation. I'm going to give you this land. Kings are going to come from you. All these promises that were given. Again, and I'm going to say this again, but Israel has yet to occupy all the land that God gave. All the boundaries of Israel that God gave in the Old Testament, they have never occupied that. Now, let me ask you this. Is God going to make good on that promise? Yeah, he is. When is that going to happen? It is going to happen when the millennial reign. All right, that's when it's going to happen. And so his attention, once again, is beginning to return back to Israel at this time to make good on the promises that he made in those covenants with Abraham. All right? So, 144,000. You know who they are? You know what their purpose is? You know what God's going to use them to do? All right? They're going to preach during the tribulation period, but then also, I believe they're going to live through the tribulation. They're going to be preserved, and they're going to enter into the millennial to populate the earth during the millennial reign as well. All right? There will be Gentiles that do the same thing, but primarily, again, the focus here is on those 144,000 Jews. All right. Clear as mud, huh? No. All right. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, we again come to you, and we're just thankful again that